Hello everyone. So in this video, we'll talk about the Pythagorean Acusmata, or things heard. We also have the Pythagorean Mathemata, or things learned, which are, as I said, extremely interconnected. But with the things heard, we have a few more things here. And one of the most important that we will consider is the idea of the immortality of the soul that I already mentioned. Now, if you remember, we talked about Pythagoras' genealogy, this very clever genealogy in which he says he descended from Hermes, and then he was told that he could not get immortality, but he was extremely clever and he got the next best thing, really, in which he may not retain his body, but he retains all his memories, which means he retains his soul in some ways, he retains his mind. This soul migrates, we saw, into different living bodies. So it migrates from, into plants and into animals and into other people. And then he retains the memory of all his lives. And this is pretty much a form of immortality. And this sort of traveling, migrating from one form of animal to another is called metempsychosis. Psyche is, if you remember, it's soul. Best translation is soul. Also translated sometimes as life, but yes, translated as soul. And metempsychosis is the migration of the soul from one body to another, right? So going from one place to another. So this idea of the soul traveling from one thing to another grants it a sort of immortality, right? Because the body dies, but the soul remains. And in fact, we are moving away from the monist world of the Milesians that we had talked about earlier to this, to a dualist worldview where you have a difference between, the body and the soul that sort of inhabits it. And when the body may die, but the soul remains, and its soul remains intact and continues on. And this kind of a worldview can only come with this idea of a kinship of nature, a homogeneity of nature. In fact, the word homogeneity comes from homogene, which means of the same birth, right? Gene, genesis, you have the word genesis from that. So it generates from the same thing. The genesis is the same, and homo, same, right? Same genesis. So there's this homogeneity, this kinship, this kindredness of all living creatures, because they all contain this sort of something. They have some capability in which the soul can travel from one body to another. In fact, we'll see with the Pythagoreans, the idea is that there is just one soul. The number one becomes really important. There's just one soul that subdivides and travels into all sorts of bodies. But before we sort of hone into that point, we said that this was different from the Homeric idea of immortality. Now, what is different in the Homeric idea of immortality is that true immortality in the Homeric sort of religion would only be reserved for the gods. Only the gods were immortal, and which is why Hermes in this story said, well, you can have everything, but you cannot become a Homeric god, like you cannot get immortality in that sense. Their immortality was a body-soul entwined, like it's one, they don't die at all, like they retain their bodily form as well. So the bodily form and their memories and ideas, like it's all there. So only the gods were immortal. So in fact, it's a pretty, for the Homeric religion, it's almost a blasphemous thing to say that, everybody in this world has this immortal soul in them. Because Achilles was not afraid of dying in the battle. He wanted glory. But at the same time, he wouldn't want to die because dying, what would happen is that his shade, he'd become a weaker form of himself. His shade would descend into Hades, and this shade is not exactly the same as this immortal soul. In fact, with the Homeric sort of in the Homeric religion, you don't really have this sort of immortality for anybody. Even, Achilles was descended from the gods, but he was not clever enough to ask for permanent memory. And there you don't even have a very clear notion, I think, of, this kind of a reincarnation belief, which we talked about the Orphic religion, if you remember. So this came from some kind of Thracian, from Thrace, reincarnation beliefs and a cult of Apollo, combined together, and they practiced these rites, and they venerated Orpheus. That's why it's called the Orphic religion, because Orpheus was somebody who descended into the underworld and came back from there. He went on a mission and failed in that mission. That's a different story altogether. But he came back, and he had this sort of a purity of his personality, this chastity, this purity. And then on top of that, also musician, and you'll see how important music is to the Pythagoreans. So there is some sort of strong connection here to this Orphic religion that we will see with the Pythagoreans, where at least the belief in metempsychosis is definitely something that they could have picked up from the Orphics. So for the Pythagoreans then, when we say they are dualist, then what are human beings? The human beings are beings with bodies whose body is a mixture of what you would think of as, earthly and mortal, and divine and immortal. Right, so this is a dual sort of body. So unlike the Milesians, where we were entirely matter, and that matter itself was alive, so we were entirely immortal in that sense. Even when dying, we are immortal, but in a very material sense. Here, there is a separation. Right, our mortal bodies are not the same as our immortal soul. In fact, the immortal soul is just temporarily inhabiting a mortal body, and then will go on to another sort of body. To become truly immortal, then one has to get rid of the mortal body, and this is sort of, I suppose, the birth of like the idealist philosophy. In fact, Plato makes a lot of this. Plato makes much of this. Plato respected Pythagoras and Pythagoreans quite a lot as well. So to become one with this immortal sort of, to become immortal is to become one with this immortal who doesn't then get stuck in human bodies from like, or mortal bodies from time to time. And this, for the Pythagoreans, would come from this lifelong effort of developing this soul, right? This mixed soul that we have, developing it so that it becomes pure, right? It becomes unmixed. And so a way of developing the divine elements in the soul over the earthly mortal elements, by living a certain kind of life, and which is why it turned into this religious and ethical sort of practice. And so the goal, in fact, if we think of salvation, if we think of what is the goal of philosophy, it's the assimilation to the divine. It is the assimilation to this divine immortal soul, and that is the goal of human life. And that is the reason for doing philosophy, the reason for doing mathematics, reason for doing all these things. Now the question is, how does mathematics help, right? What help can mathematics be towards this goal of becoming one with the immortal soul? So we talked about I've been saying the immortal soul, not immortal souls. It's not like we all have individual immortal souls. Now, in fact, that is something that, with Homeric religion, not very clear, but in fact, when Achilles, for example, died, he became a shade, went into the underworld. So a sort of not dying is happening there, dying plus not dying kind of a thing. But it's individual Achilles' soul, right? It remains in the underworld to go through whatever. Here, it's not my individual soul, because, with Pythagoras, let's say, if we follow his genealogy, which one is he? Is he, the first son of Hermes? Is he one of the plants or animals he was in? Is he Pyrrhus? Is he, which one is he? Is he Pythagoras? Just that, right? So that soul doesn't have a permanent fixed bodily identity, right? In fact, if we think of the universe as being, a cosmos, and this cosmos as being a united thing, a one. So if it is one and eternal and divine, what mortal human beings are many and divided and mortal, right? So while the universe is one, the cosmos is one, we are many, right? We are divided. If the universe is eternal, we are temporary. If the universe is divine and immortal, then we are mortal, right? And earthly. So there is this contrast between the mortal people who have this mixed soul and the universal soul, which is pure. And so, but even earthly, what Pythagoreans believed was that the essential part of us, which is our soul, eventually that's the essential part of us. Everything else changes and doesn't remain the same. So the one thing that remains the same, that one thing that can define us, in fact, is our soul. But this soul, not being mortal, is actually not a personal soul to each of us. In fact, it's just a fragment, of this big divine single soul, this universal soul. And this fragment has been cut off and divided and imprisoned in this, perishable temporary body. And this perishable temporary body has this problem of not being in alignment with the cosmos. So let's say the cosmos is ordered and structured and well ordered and beautiful. This perishable sort of human body is in disharmony, disorder. And in fact, music is one of the most important things for the Pythagoreans, because the idea was that the universe is a kind of harmony. In fact, the idea of the harmony of the spheres comes from the Pythagoreans, where they talk about this idea of that the whole universe is in some sort of a harmony. It's playing these tunes, like think of it as a big musical instrument, a lyre, in which all the strings are tuned to be harmonious. And it's playing this constant harmony, which is the harmony of, and in fact, when we talk about astronomy, we'll talk about harmony of the spheres, where you have the different planets and everything else, rotating, producing a particular sound, and then they're rotating in harmony. Now, given that we are disharmonious, what are we doing? We're actually causing, we're making these bad notes, right? We're like off tune. We're not in tune. And being off tune, we are putting actually the whole sort of like, we are not we are not sort of in alignment with this universal soul. So we are divided from the soul, and the reason we cannot join it back is because the soul is in a particular harmony and we are in a different harmony, right? So the whole point of the ethics and philosophy of the Pythagoreans was to live a particular kind of life, which would then bring us into harmony with this, like the rest of the cosmos. So, in fact, it's not just that we are kindred with other animals, this kinship, which sort of animals and plants and all these sort of, kinship between all humans and animals, which allows us to travel from one body to another, our soul to travel from one body to another, in fact, is a kinship of the soul. It's not the kinship of the body, right? It's not that, it's like similar matter. I mean, that's a different question, but it's a similar soul. And so the fact is that the soul is identical to this higher soul. In fact, think about it. What they're doing is they're doing some kind of a correspondence. So if this thing is a one soul, so everything that we have is sort of upon one, right? So they're the multiple. They're all part of this one thing that subdivides into many, right? So in that sense, we are part of this immortal divine soul, and we have to get ourselves back into harmony with this universal soul, right? Now, enough about all that. What did this belief, this Acusmata, as I said, what did they give? What did it give to them? It gave them an aim in life, right? It gave them an aim in life to cultivate the soul, to shake off the taint of the body, and to rejoin the universal soul, of which, the individual soul is just, a part, right? And so there is an idea of this condemnation to metempsychosis. So metempsychosis is one way of living immortality, but it's also, the body, the soul is condemned to this cycle of metempsychosis, a cycle of transmigration. And so long as we are still in the cycle of transmigration, we are in there because we are impure, because we still need to get into harmony. Right? So how do we get into harmony? Is by living the best, the highest type of human life. In fact, this type of life can ultimately perhaps shake off this mortal coil, and escape from this sort of cycle of rebirth and death and rebirth, which cannot be that great, and attain this final sort of bliss of becoming one with the universal, becoming one with the divine, to which by nature we necessarily belong, according to the Pythagoreans, right? And in fact, at the end of Plato's Republic, when he talks about the myth of air, that's what Plato is also sort of bringing forward, that why should we be just? That's the question of the Republic. Why justice? Why should we be just at all? When we see in the world that people who are extremely unjust, who cheat, who sort of do all kinds of horrible things, they get away with it, and in fact they make better profit of it. It's the people who are just. It's in the beginning of the Republic here, this question is raised. Glaucon and Adimantus raised this question to Plato, that it's people who are unjust who do very well in life. Who are rich, who are comfortable, who in fact, even if they commit any crimes, they can do the correct kind of sort of rituals to expiate them, to get better. And they live a kind of good life, while the people who are unjust, while the people who are just, what do? They sort of, suffer for their justice. So why should we be just? So this is the answer, right? This is the answer that Plato gives. And it's a very Pythagorean answer, that you are not in harmony, you are untuned, you are distuned, and you need to be brought into tuning. In fact, Plato in Book 3 of the Republic, I think, I might be quoting it wrong, but I think it's in end of Book 3, he talks about this lyre that is disharmonious, and he says that we need an educative program to get everybody back into harmony with things. And he wants to ban Homer for that reason. One of the people he wants to ban is Homer. He wants to ban Hesiod. He wants to ban all the things that would bring us into disharmony, teach us wrong things, teach us about terrible gods. So there is this move away, as you can see with the Pythagoreans and then with the Platonists as well, from polytheism towards this idea of the conception of the divine in general, towards this kind of monism of the divine. The dualism of the world, right? Because there is a subdivision between the soul and the body. Though they still had polytheistic beliefs, as you saw, with Pythagoras' genealogy, they still had these beliefs, but there was this idea of the divine. And they were made fun of, not everybody took them seriously. So this section from Xenophanes, where he talks about, reincarnation. So Xenophanes says, he tells a tale about Pythagoreans, and he's obviously making fun of the Pythagoreans. He says, once they say that he was passing by when a puppy was being whipped. And he took pity and said, stop, do not beat it, for it is the soul of a friend that I recognized when I heard it giving tongue, right? So this story of Pythagoras walking somewhere and encountering a dog who was being whipped, which is a terrible thing to do in any case, and he stopped them saying, this is my soul, this is my kindred, this is my friend. So the idea of kinship, the idea of kinship with all creatures was nevertheless made fun of by the rest. But then Pythagoreans themselves made fun of others. So I think with Anaximander, there is some story that goes that Pythagorean said, well, Anaximander, if he believes that we all came from fish, they still eat fish, right? You're eating your ancestors. So I don't know. The philosophers have a tendency of making fun of each other. But when it comes to the immortality of the soul, the idea of the transmigration of the soul. Now, again, this is not something that is necessarily just a Greek thing. As we said, it must have come from the Thracian Orphic beliefs. And then in Kirk and Raven, you have this quote from Herodotus where he says, the Egyptians were the first to have maintained the doctrine that the soul of man is immortal. They had not come to India, of course. And that when the body perishes, it enters into another animal that is being born at the time. And when it has been the complete round of creatures of the dry land and of the sea and of the air, it enters again into the body of man at birth. And its cycle is completed in 3,000 years. There are some Greeks who have adopted this doctrine. Some in former times, some in later. Anyway, so Herodotus mentions the Greeks having reincarnation beliefs, and we know India, of course, has these reincarnation beliefs. And then there is this connection to the Orphics. So, for example, this is from Clement. Ion of Chios of the Treblings relates that Pythagoras too attributed certain writings to Orpheus. And then you have another one from Herodotus. But woolen articles are never taken into temples, nor are they buried with them. That is unholy. These practices are in agreement with those that are called Orphic and Bacchic, but are in reality Egyptian and Pythagorean. Yeah. So again, this connection of Egyptians, Pythagoreans with the Orphics. So you have this idea of transmigration of the soul, which has come from many different sources, but what we can see with the Pythagoreans is that they really very strongly connected to their notion of mathematics, as we will see, and we have already seen, and the notion of ethical practice, and we have a conception of how this immortality of the soul works out and how it should affect our way of life. Yeah? Thank you.